The Avengers showed up and Thor went full fruit ninja on his neck. This was the first decapitation in MCU history, and honestly, it was almost too quick for a guy who caused that much pain. But Marvel wasn't done. Endgame later brought in 2014 Thanos, and in this version, he wanted to rebuild the universe in his image. But this time, Tony does the snap, and Thanos gets the dust treatment. I'm not gonna lie, watching him sit there in disbelief as his entire army flakes away was painful as hell. Not just because of the visuals, but because he finally realizes he lost everything. It was excruciating. For the so-called inevitable one, it was inevitable pain. Loki, the god of mischief, Marvel's ultimate trickster, backstabber, and part-time hero, depending on what mood he's in. This guy survived falling into space, faked his death more times than soap opera characters, and once ruled Asgard disguised as Odin just for the heck of it. He's a fan favorite because deep down, behind all the lies and betrayal, there's this weird charm. A broken son constantly trying to prove himself, but the franchise decided he's had enough fun. So, right in the opening scene, Thanos strolls into the Asgardian refugee ship and wrecks house. Thor is beaten, Heimdall gets stabbed, and Loki finally decides to pull a heroic card. He decides to play it smart, acting like he's pledging loyalty to Thanos, while slowly pulling out a dagger. But the thing is, Thanos isn't stupid. He sees it coming, and in front of Thor, Loki gets lifted into the air and slowly strangled to death. Slowly, painfully, the gasping, the struggling, and then that sickening snap as his neck breaks. Thor's scream says it all. The MCU is known for bringing characters back, but even in Marvel, there will be no resurrections this time. And that's what made it so gut-wrenching. For once, Loki wasn't scheming. He wasn't running. He was trying to save his brother, and he died for it. Voldemort, Harry Potter. He was so scared of death, he literally ripped his soul into 7 pieces. His entire arc is basically one long middle finger to mortality. Dude went from creepy orphan to he who must not be named, just terrorizing the wizarding world. And he was terrifying. He killed Harry's parents, started 2 wizarding wars, and brainwashed half of Hogwarts into becoming Death Eaters. But then, all that obsession with living forever just set him up for one of the most humiliating villain deaths ever. By the time the final battle at Hogwarts rolled around, Harry and friends have smashed every single Horcrux. Voldemort doesn't even realize he's mortal again. And then the Elder Wand betrays him. His own killing curse bounces back, and he just disintegrates into ashes in front of literally everyone. Book readers know it's even worse there. No dramatic turning to dust, just a lifeless body hitting the ground like some washed-up wizard who's wasted his whole life chasing immortality. It was absolutely painful, not just because he died, but because he spent decades trying to cheat death, only to die in the most poetic, pathetic way possible. This is the Dark Lord who scared generations of witches and wizards, reduced to a pile of nothing. The irony burns harder than fiend fire. Green Goblin, Spider-Man, Norman Osborn, the original big bad of the Spider-Man movies. But you see, this guy is not just a villain. Norman starts out as this ambitious scientist, a father who just wants success. But when the Oscorp experiments mess with his head, he becomes Spider-Man's ultimate nightmare. And let's be honest, Willem Dafoe's performance is legendary, flipping between sympathetic dad and deranged goblin with that creepy grin. What makes his death so painful is how personal it all is. By the end of Spider-Man 2002, after wreaking havoc across New York and nearly killing Mary Jane, Goblin faces off with Peter in one of the most brutal fights in superhero history. Goblin is literally beating Spider-Man into the ground until Peter finally starts fighting back. That's when Norman, desperate and concerned, tries one last trick. He calls his glider to impale Peter, but Spidey's reflexes kick in, and the glider ends up impaling Norman instead. The way he looked at Peter in those last moments, whispering, "Don't tell Harry," made me want to curl up and sob a little. Because behind the Goblin mask, he's still a father, and him dying actually makes things worse. His death gives way to Harry's hatred for Spider-Man, creating years of pain. So yeah, painful doesn't even cover it. Jafar, Aladdin, a classic Disney villain with that long goatee that tells you, do not trust this guy. From the start, he's the puppet master pulling strings behind the Sultan's back, hungry for power and control. But his ambition takes him down the darkest road possible. By the time we get to the climax of Aladdin, Jafar has already pulled off some wild stunts, disguises, manipulation, even turning into a massive snake. But his ultimate downfall comes from his biggest flaw: greed. When Aladdin tricks him into wishing to be an all-powerful genie, Jafar thinks he's secure godhood. There are flames, lightning, a dramatic transformation, and he looks unstoppable. But then, reality hits. Being a genie means you get unimaginable power, sure, but it also comes with shackles, eternal servitude. In simpler words, you become a slave forever. The look of horror on his face when the cuffs snap onto his wrists is priceless. Suddenly, this guy who spent the whole movie chasing freedom and dominance is chained and helpless, sucked into a tiny lamp. But that's not how he met his end. In Return of Jafar, he gets destroyed in lava, making his death absolutely torturous. It's a pain to watch, not just because he dies, but because he's condemned himself to eternal slavery before biting the dust. Scar, the Lion King, the smooth-talking, manipulative uncle who gave Disney kids nightmares long before Pixar started making tearjerkers. From the very beginning of The Lion King, Scar is a snake in lion's clothing. He murders his own brother Mufasa in one of the most traumatic childhood movie scenes ever, then brainwashes Simba into running away so he can steal the throne. For a while, he actually gets what he wants: Pride Rock under his control, hyenas at his command, and the royal crown. But power built on betrayal never lasts, kids. So, by the end, Simba comes back to challenge him, and Scar's lies finally catch up. Concerned on the cliff, Scar drops the act and literally begs for mercy, throwing the hyenas under the bus in the process. And that's when karma hits hardest. Simba spares him, but the hyenas overhear the betrayal. In the final fiery showdown, Scar tries one last desperate attack, but Simba hurls him off the cliff into the shadows where the hyenas swarm him. What follows is pure nightmare. You can hear his screams, and you can see the hyenas close in. That's when the camera cuts, and you can't imagine the brutal mauling that took place after. For a Disney movie aimed at kids, Scar's end is shockingly dark. He gets devoured by his own allies, dying a dog's death. Gollum, the Lord of the Rings. If there was ever a character whose entire existence was built around pain, obsession, and tragedy, it was this guy. Twisted by the One Ring over centuries, he's more husk than Hobbit by the time we see him in The Lord of the Rings. His whole story builds to one single moment: getting his precious back. And when it finally happens, it's as gruesome as it can be. After stalking Frodo and Sam all the way to Mount Doom, Gollum pounces in desperation. He ends up biting off Frodo's finger, and there's lots of blood, screams, and madness. For a brief, insane moment, he's triumphant, dancing with the ring in hand, consumed with joy. But fate and Tolkien's genius storytelling had other plans. In his delirium, he loses his balance and tumbles into the molten lava of Mount Doom, holding the ring tightly to the very end. The fall is violent, but it's also agonizing in a deeper way. Gollum finally gets what he wanted most, only to have it kill him seconds later. His death is the final tragic result of a lifetime of obsession that killed him long before the fire did. But he's kinda cute with how obsessive he is, so watching him die was painful. Erik Killmonger, Black Panther. This villain actually had a point, which is why his death stings so much. Killmonger wasn't some cartoon bad guy twirling his mustache. He was a product of the system. Abandoned in Oakland, raised with nothing but rage and scars, this man grew up with Wakanda's secrets hanging over him. He knew his people had the power to change the world, and instead they just hid. So yeah, Killmonger wanted to burn it all down, and honestly, can you blame him? The dude shows up, challenges T'Challa, absolutely bodies him in a fight, and for a hot second, he's the king of Wakanda. His plan? Arm the oppressed, flip the system, and watch the colonizers choke on their own medicine. But Marvel can't have a bad guy actually win. So of course he gets taken out in the final duel. T'Challa stabs him, but instead of begging for mercy or pulling some last-minute comeback, Killmonger delivers one of the coldest exits in movie history. When he's offered a chance to be healed, he says it's better to die free than live in chains. And then he stands there, bleeding out, watching the Wakandan sunset like it's the first beautiful thing he's ever seen. It's painful, but it's also kind of badass. Killmonger went out on his own terms, middle finger up to the system, which is more than most Marvel villains can say. Lord Shen, Kung Fu Panda 2. For an animated film about a noodle-loving panda, Kung Fu Panda 2 dove shockingly deep into the psychology of its villain. Lord Shen was no ordinary evil overlord. He's actually a broken soul molded by fear, rejection, and obsession. Born into privilege as the heir of the Peacock clan, Shen's life changed after a prophecy foretold that he would be defeated by a warrior of black and white. In response, he went kind of insane. He wiped out entire panda villages in a desperate attempt to escape fate, only to ensure it by creating the very enemy destined to stop him, Po. By the time of his final confrontation, when Po offers Shen forgiveness, an actual chance at peace, he refuses. His obsession is too strong, his pride too consuming. Instead of grasping at redemption, he allows himself to be crushed beneath the very weapon of war he built to secure his power. So we watch Shen die, not because Po beat him, but because he couldn't forgive himself and he couldn't imagine a life outside of his obsession. That makes his end less of a win for the heroes and more of a sad, tragic closing chapter for a life wasted on fear. Syndrome, The Incredibles, discount Iron Man with mommy issues. Pixar really cooked up one of their most tragic villains here. The guy literally started out as Buddy Pine, the overeager fanboy who just wanted to hang out with Mr. Incredible. That's it. He wasn't evil, he wasn't dangerous, he was just a dorky kid with dreams. But when Mr. Incredible hit him with the coldest, get-lost kid energy imaginable, Buddy snapped. Fast forward a few years, and that crushed little boy reinvented himself as Syndrome, a billionaire tech bro with a god complex and more gadgets than Elon Musk. And honestly, his whole plan is pretty brilliant. Kill off superheroes, sell his weapons, and then swoop in pretending to be the hero. But the funniest part is that his downfall comes from the one thing Edna Mode told us not to mess with: the cape. After snatching up baby Jack and trying to make his dramatic getaway, Syndrome gets his cape sucked into a jet turbine, and just like that, he's done. But the thing is, his death isn't painful because of the gore. It's painful because you can't help but think this guy could have been great. He had the brains, the passion, the drive. He could have been Tony Stark with a better hairline. But instead, he spiraled so hard into villainy that he literally got chewed up and spit out by his own arrogance. Might be the most ironic Pixar death ever. Evil might win battles, but it never survives the final scene.